Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Bloom the Podcast. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode. We have a super fun one today, so hope you guys all enjoy. If you guys are new to the show, I am your host, Donovan. This is my co-host, Ashley.
Yo!
And we have two special guests on our show today. We have Giddalti and we have our longtime friend, Giana. How you guys doing?
We're doing good, man.
Yeah,
thanks for having us.
Yeah, for sure.
We're
We're super excited to have you guys. It's going to be a fun one. Before we jump into the episode, though, I'd like to introduce you guys a little bit so you guys can tell the audience a little bit about yourselves, what you guys are currently doing. So we'll start with you. What's going on? What's up with you?
Nothing, man. Everything's good so far.
Everything's good?
So happy to meet you guys for the first time. Like, what was it, like a couple months ago?
Yeah.
I was like very genuine, and I appreciate that. I appreciate your
Likewise,
hospitality. Man. Yeah. So right now I have I'm starting a fitness page that I'll direct you to it.
We'll leave the links.
Because it's always good form.
Yeah, everything's always good form.
We'll leave the links for that in the description, so you guys make sure to go follow him on that to support the gains.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
But yeah, that's what I got going on so far. It's gonna be new. It's something new. I've never done it before, so hopefully it's just as good as your podcast we got.
Hey man, we're still itty bitty babies, so we got a lot of work to do. But I appreciate that.
Thanks for that.
Of course. Yeah. What about you, Giana?
What I do, I'm a sign language interpreter. I work out. I love Jesus. I know these people. So that's pretty much what I do. My sign language page, I forgot the actual link. We can just link it.
We'll link it.
But I don't really post on there a lot. But I'll do it more. If you want me to.
Like if you guys follow me, I'll do it more.
If you follow me, I'll make something happen.
For sure.
But,
yeah. Thank you guys so much for sharing. Yeah, we'll jump right into today's episode. We've got a fun one. Interesting topic, I think, and it's going to be kind of about how Christians relate to people in the world, mainly secular people, non-Christian people. There's a lot of stigma around Christians and the way that we act or the way that we're supposed to act to the outside world that don't really understand what Christianity is. And I think a lot of times we don't take that into account as believers when we're living our daily lives. And that oftentimes leads to a gospel message that isn't very appealing to the secular world. So I'd actually like to start it off with you, Giddalti, because you were telling us your testimony not too long ago when we were chatting, and I thought it would go perfectly for this episode. So if you could give us a little bit of your testimony to kind of lead us into this episode, that'd be great.
Sure. So I grew up in evangelical Christian church since birth, pretty much. I was introduced to it. Didn't know too much about it. I just thought this was life, honestly. Right. And as soon as I was able to kind of figure out what my family was and what we do and what we believe, that's when I started to figure out the habits. So typically what the church was like is Thursdays and Sundays were church. And then Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays and Saturdays were just more for like study. So most of the time we spent at church. It was always being at church. I honestly thought that's how every family was.
You're right.
Yeah, everybody was just going to church. Everybody. Till people were like, well, we don't believe in God and we don't do much of what you do. That's when it started, like being in school with other kids that don't believe in it. That's when I started to figure out, well, some people are different. Right. So after maybe like in high school is when I started to really, as my teenage years I started to develop. I was starting to figure out, well, you know what? I actually don't even know what I'm doing here. I just attend. It just becomes habit.
Right.
So I was just like, well, if this is how I feel, do most people feel this way? But no, when I would attend church, there's a lot of like worship there. So I thought maybe it's just me, or maybe I don't believe what they believe. But a lot of it, what I would say in my experience, not all experiences, but mine particularly, is they have I began to feel like it was more motivated by like going to church was more motivated by just habit. You just go. And the questions that I would try to address weren't actually answered from people I asked at the church or like pastors.
Right.
So I started to develop this kind of feel that I didn't really feel belonging there.
Right.
So that the church would often have things that like answers to my questions that were kind of vague. And the things that we had to do for example, like there's a lot, you know what I mean, like a lot of to-do lists,
right? A very
like
legalistic
thing.
Like
what you couldn't do mostly,
everything you couldn't do,
right?
And nothing that you really
could.
So
exactly, but things you couldn't do, and it felt like I was restricted a lot, and that's kind of where I started to really understand, well, I do see the good things in it, but there's a lot of things I couldn't do, and it's not, I don't think it was a lot because I just wanted to be out and doing bad things.
Right.
It just felt like I was restricted on every path that I wanted to take. And this is the way you got to worship Jesus.
Right. Like there's only one way that you can properly go to church and properly worship and all that.
Right. And then in some ways I couldn't express it because I didn't know. We were reading off the King James Version. Okay. At church, so that's
first off.
So even just reading that was difficult, right. And I was like, I didn't even begin to know about the different versions till much later in my life,
right?
And I was like, what? There's more than one.
Right.
So anyway, after like I think I was like 18, 19, I just was like, I'm not into this anymore.
Right.
I don't. If this is the God that we're trusting, then it's not. It's kind of off-putting.
Right.
It's more difficult than it is easy in the process.
Right. Because
of the to-dos you couldn't do. Right. So it just more recently it's when I met people where I was working at the gym. This is where I met her and a lot of good friends I have now. She introduced me to some of them, and I just saw it was a different view from growing up to a different church completely. Right. And I was like, wow, this is different, like on a different level, like big time. So I thought, well, I was more intrigued than what was I? I was like, I want to see what
this kind of Christianity is, because he only knew one Christian or Christianity.
Right.
Yeah, so I was like intrigued. I was like, well, okay, let's see
how you guys do Christian.
Yeah, how you guys do Christian. Yeah. So I remember that my first experience there was like, oh, like you guys. I think the day we went, she was wearing like workout clothes.
Yeah, I was wearing like
we had just came from the gym or something.
And I was like,
and I was like,
you're allowed to not wear a dress.
And then she had sandals on too, and I was like, yo, we can't wear sandals at our church. I was like, why? She looked so just hip. But everybody was worshiping, everything seemed fine. But my senses were like, this is probably not the right way to worship. She's doing this all wrong. And this is coming from someone who didn't even participate much in the church I used to go to. Right. As far as like the worship, like actually being with Jesus in a relationship with him. So, so everything changed. Like even the people I met were very kind, like extremely kind. And so I compared it to my church that I grew up for my whole life. And I was like, these people are so sweet. They're actually genuinely interested. And this is just my experience from that church. So it was a lot of negativity. Not a lot of people, if you were new, they would address you, but not as much as I did. I got addressed when I went to that church. Yeah. To the church there. And so it felt really nice. I felt really welcome, and comforted.
So is it that change of like seeing the real love of Christians that kind of steered you towards Christianity more?
It definitely made me realize. I was like, okay, well, this is completely new, but I kind of like it. I mean, you're drawn to it,
right?
That's the goal.
And that's the appeal of the Christian life that I think we oftentimes lose, is the peace and happiness that we're supposed to be able to exude as believers. We have really nothing to worry about. We know God is in control of all things in our lives. We know where our sins are covered by Jesus. We know these things, which should alleviate so much stress and tension off our lives. I think that's important to show. So it's really, really encouraging to hear that you were able to see that from a church and really latch on to it. That's really special.
Yeah, and I'm very happy about that, just because I could have been going off my whole life just hanging out with the people that just did not care for it, or just just the wrong crowd. So that's I think
I think that has to do with a lot with the topic today, is just the difference in church and how even though he didn't participate a lot in his church, just how they made him feel sometimes with more legalism or more to-dos. And then the example of me taking him to church for the first time when he was like, oh, she's not supposed to wear that, she's not supposed to do that, just in the sense of like how most secular or just people who don't believe in God or in the Christian God see Christians. Right. Like I have a group of friends now that I'm pretty close to, and all they say is like that most Christians are just super judgmental and very legalistic and very much like, if you don't believe what I believe, I'm going to shove it down your throat. Right. And so that is what, sadly, that is what Christians have. I'm not saying it's their fault, because there are individuals, but there's also people, how they see Christianity is that. That's what they see. And that is the sad part about it all, because if you say I'm a Christian, you can barely come to someone saying that without them being like, you're not going to accept me, you're not going to love me, right? You're going to judge me.
And it should be the complete opposite, because literally that's the mission field, right? Yeah. That's what we're called to do, is love those people and be caring for their souls. So absolutely. I would be interested to hear from both you, and I mean, we had similar upbringing, but from you, what was your upbringing like to kind of highlight that in your life, that kind of teaching that kind of helped you live that way?
Well, I grew up in a pretty conservative environment as well, and for a long time it was pretty legalistic, like the churches I was going to. And my parents were first-generation believers, so they had come from Catholicism and changed to Christianity. And so when they were raising us, me and my sisters, they didn't know what they were doing. Right. And so they said, okay, so we came from Catholicism, and now we're going to try and teach you how to be believers. Right. And so they taught us a lot of things, but they didn't know how to do it in a way that would make us, like, not judgmental. Right. So for a long time I was very judgmental. It wasn't until like a few years ago where I learned, oh snap, like that's not the point. That's what people want. People want to feel love, people want to feel accepted, people want to feel like they're important, and their beliefs and their systems, they don't want to change that. So I'm not really sure how that changed, but I think it's just by the grace of God that something clicked in my head, that it was like legalism and judgment and like understanding that God is a colorful God. He's a God of diversity and a God of uniqueness. That's something beautiful about his character that I love. That's why we have different races, that's why we have different cultures, that's why we have different everything, is because God is a God of diversity. And so if he wanted it only one way, I think he would have made that very clear. Right. So the fact that he doesn't, and he gives us commandments and gives us guidelines and things like that, but the way you can worship and the way that you can love others, be in other people's lives, looks so differently in every church, in every culture, in every family. Right. So I think that is something that's beautiful and keeps people in the search for God, instead of just being like, okay, well, this is the template and I should follow this, because that's not what we're called to as Christians.
Right. And we don't want to be the template for sure.
Definitely not.
For you, what would you say?
I mean, I kind of want to make a point, like going back, like I think it's also everyone who believes in anything calls themselves like Christians. Yeah. So that's also the other problem we have, is we're known as literally a group of a whole like bunch of different beliefs. Like half the people don't even believe what we believe, but we're like lumped in together. Like, oh, those Christians, you know.
Yeah, America is a Christian country.
Right. But they're all like so different from each other. So it's like crazy. Like these people probably think we're insane, because like there's so much crazy stuff out there.
Yeah, it's true. So, everything gets confusing when you just put the label of Christian on it.
Exactly.
Yeah. It really goes back to just like an experience. Like, for example, if I weren't a Christian, and you probably came up to me, I met you like at a grocery store, simple interaction. Right. You see me at a grocery store and you cut in line, and then I say, oh, I was actually standing here. I was actually next in line. And your response to that, I could see you differently. And then if we got into a conversation after, for whatever reason, and I found out you were Christian, that just changes my whole idea of like, those are Christians.
Right.
And or it could have been just it just could be completely different, where you just address me a certain way.
Right.
We spark a conversation, and then I'm like, oh, you're cool. And then later on, I get to know you more for whatever reason, because I know this is all hypothetical, but you somehow we become friends from a grocery store, and then later I find out that you're Christian, but you're not kind of like instilling that. You're not living it. Yeah. So that I think that's what it really should be, and I think we kind of went over that in church too a little bit, like being Christ-like, where they can see it, but you're not actually even saying anything just yet. But they just feel something differently.
Right. Yeah. Because that's the tricky part, is you want to stand out, and we're called to stand out. We're called to be different. But I think a lot of Christians, especially on the conservative end, have gone to such an extreme of standing out that they've tried to distance themselves from the world, and in turn you end up distancing yourself from the mission field, and you're not able to really evangelize as effectively as you can, because like you said in the beginning, everything's so judgmental, and once people find out you're Christian, they're like, oh, well, you're definitely going to hate me because I do this or this. And it's like, no, that's not what we should be, exuding from our lives. What we should be exuding is a care for their souls and understanding, because we've come from that life ourselves. No matter if you were raised in a Christian home or not, we all have a point in time where we were not saved. We have to come to a realization that I'm living in the world, whether you're in church or not, I'm living for sin, not for Christ. And that's where we can relate with the world is, I know exactly what it's like to be slave to my sin. And I know what it's like to not be slave to my sin, because now I know Jesus.
Yep. Right. And I think that's where us as Christians really fail, is when you start judging unbelievers. Like, you expect something different from them. And then you expect them to listen to you after you're like, well, I totally just judged everything about you, but listen to me. I have good news.
Well, just like even on like a personal level, when there's like no religion tied to it, just being an overall just a great person, that just automatically just speaks to you. You gravitate towards that because Ashley's a great person. And I'm like, it's like I've met, like what is different. So that's kind of like what I've met with some people. Like, they have this, some believers have this thing that I've met where they just have like this glow in them where it just stands out. But you would never know unless there's like a cross on their chain or something, Right. But you would never know that they're believers till like much later, or even in their dialogue. That's when you start to notice, they're different.
Right. And I actually have a point on that I want to bring up, because I think that poses an interesting question. But before I do, we got to do our little ad for Sparkling Ice. Y'all make sure you guys tag them in the comments below. We're trying to make that headway to get that sponsorship. I'm actually going to start running with that, thanks to Tori. Running with. Got a little Sparkling Ice, guys. Make sure you guys tag them below. But getting right back into it, that makes me want to ask you guys and kind of start the conversation for this is, as believers and kind of having that understanding of how the world sees us, what are some things that we can do to practically put in place to kind of change that stigma of, that judgment, and kind of show that glow that you were talking about, where people are more intrigued by our lives and want to befriend us so that they can know what our life is like because we're exuding that glow, rather than turning them away? What are some things that you guys think would benefit that?
So 2 different things with believers and then with unbelievers. So I would say with unbelievers, it just comes to what we were just talking about, which is the judgment aspect, but that having to be the understanding that you're like, okay, these people don't have the love of Jesus in their heart. And that has always been enough of a reason for me to just be like, okay, if I didn't, there is no reason to not do the things that they're doing. And so if they're in sin, then you just kind of really have to think practically about like, okay, if I didn't have Jesus, then why else would I be trying to be a good person? Like, really, like, what is the reason? There really is no other reason. I can explain that further if that doesn't make sense. But with believers,
I think that makes sense.
Okay, cool. I was like, I don't know if it does, but
makes perfect sense.
Okay, cool. But with believers, we're actually just learning about it in church today, which is the concept of unity. And I think that this would be great for the Christian community, just in how people perceive us, because even if we disagree on things, on like the to-do list. Like, our churches are both Christian that we grew up in, but they're very, very different in a lot of areas.
Right.
But if we have Christ in common, that is the priority. That's what we should be focusing on. Yeah. So unity is what we're called to do, especially as church, especially as Christians, as a body. So if we keep that in mind, but it really comes down to the individual instead of like the Christian label as a whole.
Right.
So that's why it's difficult, because I know we're talking about it, but it's difficult because it really is up to each individual to choose that for themselves.
Yeah.
So
it's hard.
But
yeah.
I mean, I would say more specifically, like you mentioned right now, I think as the individual first, because we're not always together as like a group of Christians.
Like we're not always
around like packs. We don't travel in packs. I mean, we are in packs, but what I mean is through our traffic of life,
right?
It's just individual sometimes, and that's how I feel you can make the impact there.
Yeah.
And there's always room for growth, especially as Christians, and there's new challenges every day.
Yeah.
Even the same ones. So I feel that's a good way to start promoting. Would be within yourself first. Fix the things within yourself.
Yeah.
Because I know that from where I used to be to where I am now, there's still some of the challenges that I have to face.
Absolutely.
New or old. So if my day starts off bad, if I don't start with Jesus in my heart, my day just goes south. So I have to, today I woke up a little bit groggy. I woke up angry, or for whatever reason, right? You address those things. Because when you start going out to the world, you start to produce that somehow.
Yeah.
And now
it's the trajectory for you.
Yeah, and then just, without even knowing, you interact with someone and you come off rude.
You have road rage.
Yeah, like things like that. So I think it would just, my thing would just be that number one is, it starts with the individual first.
Absolutely.
Because then,
even this can turn into legalism, though. It's kind of funny because if we're all trying to do the right thing and trying to promote Christianity in a more attractive manner, then when someone isn't doing that, that could be difficult.
Yeah,
it can.
Well,
Christian,
it goes into it, but like it's always being focused on you go push it through the grid of Scripture, like what it's the calling is. So I think that's probably the most important. I would say.
I want to comment on that, but first I'll pass it to you and ask what you think.
Yeah, I think also I feel like they've named like all the like practical ways like that we should be doing that. But if we want to be like extra, I think the thing that would probably help also a lot is evangelizing. Because how is anybody going to know the difference between all these different religions if no one's telling them the difference? You know what I'm saying? Like, we need to be out there like, hey, I'm a Christian. And I've been evangelizing before, and I asked them, like, oh, so, like, like, what religion? They're like, oh, Christian. And then after talking, they realize, like, oh, wait, maybe we're not Christian.
We're not Christian?
Exactly.
Who's not right? Am I right or you right?
Exactly. So it's like, you're like, just by, like, talking to them, you're like, hey, like, actually, this is what Christian is, and what you might be doing is actually a little different. Because they're like, oh, wait. Actually, I'm Catholic, or I'm this, or I'm that. There's a whole bunch of different areas that we can, like, help them see if we're actually, like, trying to share that with them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And going back to what you were saying about improving those things in yourself first, because I think it's a little bit ironic for us to think that people are going to want Christianity if we don't want it ourselves. So I think we have to start with... So we have to start with as practical as you can, and I love that you said that, starting with our actual genuine love for the Lord.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us struggle with that, and I know I have struggled with that in my own life, where, like, I say I'm a Christian, I do these things, and it's like, but where is this coming from? And is it coming from a place of, like, genuine love for the Lord? And it's redirecting your brain to start there every day. But, like, I love the Lord, and that's why I'm doing what I do. And you were saying, like, why would I be a good person if I don't love the Lord? It's like, the motivation, your why has to be because I love God. And when that comes naturally to you, and once you can say you love God and that shows in your life, then you can actually start to move into that next phase of, now how do I show other people that this God is worthy to be loved as well? Right?
Yeah.
Because that's what we're really, I think a lot of people get stuck on preaching the wrath of God. They're saying, well, if you don't repent, God is going to come down and he's going to send you to hell. instead of preaching the reverse, because that is a true statement. If we don't repent from our sins, we are going to go to hell. But it's a 50-50 thing. There is the wrath and there's also the love, and the love is offered to everybody. And I think we need to focus on highlighting God's love for us, because we're still sinners and we mess up every day, and God still loves us. So showing them that we're not perfect people, and that he covers all our sins and can do the same for them, I think is a much more powerful approach than coming at them with like, well, you're going to burn in hell forever. I think we need to kind of redirect. We have to obviously show that there is a problem and there will be punishment for sin, but combating that with the love of Christ. I think that's super important.
That's major there for sure. Just highlighting wow, that's great.
Right, and not seeing ourselves as like, oh yeah, like we're Christians, you know, like we did not do anything to like get this, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like
we're not the pinnacle, like the standard here.
And we're still like so awful. Like we haven't read our Bibles in 3 months, and we're out here like, why aren't you a Christian? Like I just don't get why you don't understand. Like, you know, like we just need to like lower ourselves a bit too, because I think more people will be willing to listen if you're not on your high horse.
It goes back to like even advice things. Like it's so easy for me to tell you how to do something, and then when it comes to me having to put it down, it's like I could tell you to eat right, but I'm over here eating all kinds of junk.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah, exactly. So,
exactly.
But yeah, I think it goes back to like it's so great the way you said it. It's just your why.
Yes.
It's like it's kind of like why. I want to share something with you that's so big. Mm-hmm. This is why I live my life the way I do.
Right.
And I want to share that with you.
Right.
Because it's kind of, why would you prevent somebody from not hearing that?
Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Especially when you really put into context just how miraculous the gospel message is. Mm-hmm. Especially once you really understand the depths of your sin. And the longer I'm a believer, the more baffled I am by the gospel. Because the more I understand just how depraved I am, and how I'll never even understand to the fullest extent how wretched my heart really is. And the fact that there's nothing that I can offer the Lord, but he still loves me anyway. Right. And I think a lot of people think that Christianity is earned by works and doing enough good things to make God love you, and it's the complete opposite. It's the complete opposite. We have nothing we can give God. Our greatest achievements are dirty rags, as the Bible would say, right? Mm-hmm. So it's reversing our mindset to think it's not about what we're going to do for the Lord in that regard, like works, because we don't have to do anything, and there's never going to be enough good things we can do to earn his love. Yeah. He loves us because that's who his character is, not because we read our Bible and recited a verse today. Mm-hmm. Like that's not what it is. Yeah. So I think letting people know that, there's nothing that you're going to have to do the only thing you have to do is acknowledge your sin and say, rescue me from this. I believe that you can rescue me from this. That's the only requirement for Christianity. So kind of drilling that into our gospel presentations when we're evangelizing, that, it's not about, climbing this ladder of achievements and, trying to be this perfect person.
Right. Because you can easily head that way.
Easily.
It's just like you just have like these, you go up to evangelize, but you just have like these badges. Yeah. Like it's not even about
You're
that.
Like, now I'm like doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm evangelizing, but you don't actually care about it. You're just doing it.
Right, and it's only for others to see that you're doing that.
Yeah, it's eye service. Yeah. And that's why I say, like, coming back to the why. No matter what we're doing, the motivation should be stemming from that love for the Lord. Mm-hmm. And I love in your testimony how that was so apparent when coming to your church and you bring him to church and seeing that the people were there not to just for status quo, like, yeah, check that box off, I went to church. They were there because they're gaining knowledge and wanting to further their relationship with the Lord. Mm-hmm. And that's such a powerful thing. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great.
For sure. Thank you guys so much for coming on this episode. I loved having you guys on. It was such a fun conversation, and we'll definitely have to have you guys back for another episode.
Sweet.
If you guys enjoyed this, make sure you guys give it a like, and we'll leave both of their Instagrams in the description below, so go follow them there. And make sure you guys subscribe for weekly episodes, and we will see you guys on the next one.